The Minnesota Wild spent all of the Toronto game playing defense because there was no D to be found anywhere. We'll break down an absolute masterclass in how not to defend the Toronto Maple Leafs. Plus, we'll talk about the great start for Rossi and Brock Faber, all on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, this is Brandon Duham, and this is Locked on Wild.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure that you join Locked on Wild Nation by subscribing on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, Alex Micheletti joins us as we try to figure out what the heck happened to the Minnesota Wild defense against the Toronto Maple Leafs. We'll talk about the great starts for Rossi and Brock Faber and a look to a very intriguing week ahead for the Minnesota Wild. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. As mentioned, we're joined by Alex Micheletti. We're going with a half victory Monday, because the Wild did win on Thursday against the Panthers, but didn't win their most recent game against Toronto. So partial victory Micheletti Monday here today, Alex. But boy, that was something against the Toronto Maple Leafs on Saturday. 7 goals allowed, and it seemed like each one of them got more frustrating as the night went on.
Yeah, just the defense was all over the place and bad penalties. You had a Marcus Foligno, Ryan Reeves fight. I mean, you had everything in this game. And when you're on the road and you're playing in that environment, you can't cheat. You can't give Toronto any room to dance around like we saw William Nylander do all game, and Austin Matthews is just on an absolute heater. 2 hat tricks to start off his season, and one against the Wild the other night. But you saw they kept panning to Dean and his face. You saw it all from him. He was just so frustrated with his team's defensive effort.
Well, and the most frustrating part about it too was that the Wild had multiple opportunities to tie the game at 4 in the start of the third period. They got it to a 4-3 deficit. From 4-1, they had opportunities to try to tie it. They just couldn't get them to go. And then the wheels just completely fell off in the third period. You mentioned Alex Goligoski with it's a penalty that a veteran cannot. You can't commit that type of a penalty. And not that Goligoski was wrong in what he was trying to get across to the officials, but you can't do that at that point in the game. And Dean was extremely frustrated about that afterwards. But you have plays like that. You have plays like the first Austin Matthews power play goal where he basically can just walk up to the front of the net and put one in from 10 feet out. The one that absolutely just frosts me is the Nylander goal at the end to make it 7-3 at the time, where he basically just skates up the left side of the zone completely untouched. Jon Merrill is in full back skate mode. He's just there. He's just there as Nylander just steps up and does whatever he wants. And of course it ends up leading to a goal. There was too much of that going on. And I'm going to give Denny another shout out because he was right on the money that this has moved on to something that they're going to have to kind of work through. It's a concern now as the season unfolds.
100%. You have a bottom pairing of of a couple of guys that and Jon Merrill and Alex Goligoski that probably aren't full-time guys anymore. So that's a major concern because you don't know when once Jared Spurgeon is healthy. I mean, which one do you play? It's like it's really you really have to just worry every time that third pairing is out there now, which it's frustrating because those guys have to play. They can't just go with the top four. So I mean, that's that's going to cause some major just frustrations for Dean and the rest of the coaching staff. And you saw it in that Toronto game. It just when you're playing a extremely offensive talented team like Toronto, and they have no injuries like Florida, that's why Thursday was completely different. Florida's battling through so many injuries, and so we saw a true test against Toronto.
But I think this is the part where people get frustrated, and I fully understand it. I fully hear it. Is that like you go through the entirety of the offseason and you don't do anything really to address that defensive core. I mean, Brock Faber, we'll give him more credit here in a little bit. Brock Faber's been fantastic. He's been the best defenseman on this team by far, somehow managed to not factor in any of the goals against while he was out there on the ice, which in a game where 7 were scored by Toronto, that's very impressive. And beyond that, he's playing well. But like beyond that, this group of 3 was a problem last year, and it was one of those where it's like you didn't hear it as much 2 years ago because this team just scored a ton of goals, and it was kind of one of those things that just hid some underlying problems. But now when you go on the road, when teams have last change, they are licking their chops anytime that third pairing is out there on the ice because they're like, okay, we'll just throw our top line out there against them and we'll go score a goal. So it's a head scratcher as to why nothing was done. And I understand on the, say, Merrill side of things, even probably the Goligoski as well, is there's not a lot of appealing play right now to where you could convince a team to take them for much in return. But like, you got to do something. You can't just keep throwing them out there with the hope that they're going to just magically improve. Veteran players at this stage in their career, what you see is what you get.
No, 100%. We've talked off air too about with teams, like the Wild handing out no trade clauses in these contracts, and this is one, with Alex Goligoski that is starting to come back to bite them. And we talked I think we talked all summer saying hopefully Bill is able to trade one of these guys over the summer like he did with Dmitry Kulikov late, but no team bought. And like we've talked about too, other teams see the tape too, so that's where it makes it even tougher too, because there's it's a different NHL. It seems like there's tight caps all over. I mean,
yeah.
we saw in the first week, there was 4 teams that had to play shorthanded because there was no cap space. It's a different league right now until the cap goes up, and so it makes it even harder to make early season trades, even if you can't get something done over the summer. And the Wild are now so close to being at the cap. It's crazy that the only person that they can afford is Dakota Mermis. It's absolutely insane. I can't imagine, Chris O'Hearn, he has the calculator out and is trying to see how much they can even afford to have Dakota Mermis, travel with the team. It's mind boggling.
Yeah, it makes my head hurt. I yearn for the days of the Carson Soucy, Ian Cole third pairing. It's been
you never had to
a
worry with
minute
those guys,
since that happened, but No, you just were able to count on them to do their thing, and
block shots,
it just goes to show
chip it
you.
out, and
Yeah, it just goes to show you how if that third pairing is a problem, it just is something that eats at you all season long. So it's something that the Wild are going to have to figure out, because you can't keep having performances like that. And we'll see when Jared Spurgeon returns. We've obviously got to now worry about the Matt Boldy injury situation. What a difference a game makes after game 1 to now game 2. But hey, there have been a couple of nice bright spots so far this season. We'll talk about the starts for Brock Faber and Marco Rossi. And we'll take a look at what is to come here this week from a games perspective for the Minnesota Wild. That is all on the way here on today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Daily fantasy hockey season is here, and that gives you plenty of opportunities to hit big depending on who you pick for your lineup with the Sleeper app. There are so many different possible scenarios for how the season will play out, but to have a chance at winning big, you need to be playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. As the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network, Sleeper is our top choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. With stud players like Kirill Kaprizov, Connor McDavid, Alex Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, Cale Makar, all you need to do is pick more or less on stats for these stars. Choose stats like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more. It's all so easy, you can set your lineup in under 60 seconds. Plus 100-time payouts on Sleeper are available, so start paying attention and get your picks right so you can win big. Make sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you will get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. Again, use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. That's Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Seth Topal joined by Alex Micheletti. Alex, let's talk about the positives for this team so far. And let's start with Marco Rossi. Obviously, there was a lot of discussion throughout the offseason as to what we were going to get, if he was going to be able to contribute for this team. Kind of a weird fit on that third line. And so far through 2 games, he's had 1 goal waved off. Thanks, Florida, for stealing the joy from the building on Thursday night. But then he scored 1 against Toronto. He nearly scored a second. And honestly, he was one of the better players on the ice for the Wild throughout the game. And he looks like a completely different player this season, which speaks to the work that he put in the offseason. He added some weight. He was working with the coaches all summer. And it's really paid off. And a lot of the plays that we didn't see him making last year, he's making with confidence this year. And he looks like somebody that can really be a part of this team and an impact part of this team as the season unfolds.
Yeah, it's all about playing with confidence. He just looks like a completely different guy because, he believes in himself. I think, he got, down on himself, early last season, and then that led to being in Iowa. And, from there, when you're in the AHL and you think you're going to be in the NHL, it's tough, and so, he spent the entire summer here, which was huge. And that added weight is noticeable, because he's not getting knocked off the puck. And I think, even though that goal got waved off against Florida, it gave him, some belief that, hey, I can do this. I put it in, I actually put it into the back of the net, even though it ended up not counting and not being in the, in the stat sheet. But, he came into Toronto in the Toronto game and, even though he said it was a lucky bounce, I mean, he batted it out of the air, so that takes some, hand-eye coordination to, actually pull it off. And so, that's a good Toronto team. That, Samsonov's a good goalie too. And so, once that went in, then, you saw the rest of the game that he was, he was trying to get that second one and help his team. And so, yeah, as we know, it's an awkward line for him, but, he scored. So just getting that monkey off the back is just huge for Marco. And I think, even the people that don't like his game, have to just say what an amazing moment for the kid after all that he's been through in his short time in the NHL.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing I think that we're encouraged by is that he is the main driver of what's going on that third line. And so there's hope that if he continues to do that, that maybe he sees his way higher up in the lineup. We'll wait and see in that regard. But the thing that I like too is he might get shoved by a Toronto player. He's right up at whoever that is. And he mixed it up with more than a few Blue Jays. I knew I was going to do that. Maple Leafs throughout the course of the night too. So he's got that agitator style to his game, which I think everybody just gets a little bit of that from Joel Eriksson-Ek. But yeah, it's been great to watch him over these first two games just really look like a guy that is comfortable playing at the NHL level.
Yeah, 100%. And, his game's only going to grow here too. And so he knows that the team is, relying on him to be in the lineup because like we like we talked about earlier in the episode, they can't afford anybody else. So it's on Marco to continue to, grow and produce and help out and chip on the offense, when he can. And, he showed that in Toronto, and, he's got, a couple more, upcoming teams here in Montreal and, the Kings that are really offensive teams, high paced. And so, he's going to get the ice time and, it's going to be, flying, the action is. And so, his line is going to be relied upon to help, on the offense here. And so, hopefully get some, power play opportunities too. That second unit help get that going, and not always having to rely on the top unit. And so, yeah, we'll see if Marco can get a couple of goals, this week too.
Another player who has just been really, really solid. And I don't want to I'm not trying to throw shade at Jonas Brodin here, who I think has been good too this year. It's amazing watching Brodin not on TV. He's everywhere when the action's going on. He just floats around. He's like an assassin out there, just floats around, does his thing. But his pairing partner, Brock Faber, has, I think, been better than anybody would have expected through two games. He played 24 minutes against the Toronto Maple Leafs. He was a +3. He had an assist. And if not for what Brock Faber has done so far, this Wild defense would be further in shambles than it already is. And so you look at these two kids, Brock Faber and also Marco Rossi, and there's some excitement for how their game can continue to grow. But Faber just impresses me with everything that he does. I mean, that first goal of his career at the top of the zone is a beauty. But everything he does defensively is just so sound, and he's never somebody that makes the same mistake twice. And you see him learning out there on the ice as he's playing, and it seems like he just has a ton that he's going to be able to offer this team over the foreseeable future.
Yeah, he may never have the offensive game that people said, hey, when this trade went down, why are we trading Kevin Fiala for Brock Faber? Well, I mean, look at what he's doing. It's just an absolutely incredible to see. And, from the moment in that Dallas series where he stopped Marchment from scoring, you knew it was game on for Brock, and he took his play in that playoff series into the regular season here, and it's just been awesome to see. And the Brodin Faber pairing is just lockdown city. I mean, good luck trying to score against those two. And Brock Faber has actually, played better than Jonas Brodin, which is crazy to think. I mean, you look at that Toronto game and Jonas had, a couple of turnovers that were costly. Another one where Gus bailed out Brodin at the end of the period and stopped Nylander. But Brock is just his skating ability. That's what helps him so much too. And like you said, he never makes the same mistake twice, and he's such a smart player. And that's why Brodin and Faber are such a good pairing too, because they're such smart players. And it's so fun that that we have that pairing for a long time to come too.
I got to read this tweet from Brett Marshall of the Sound the Foghorn podcast. Brock Faber, who played in his 4th career regular season game on Saturday, finished the game with a 69% expected goals for, while playing the majority of his 22 minutes, 7 seconds, 5-on-5 minutes against Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, Tyler Bertuzzi, Morgan Rielly, and TJ Brody. He held them to 0 goals across nearly 11 minutes of 5-on-5 play. He factored into a Minnesota Wild goal in the process as well. So, like we said, 7 goals on the board for Toronto. Precisely none of them came against Brock Faber. And so, kid is a certified stud and has really looked good through the first couple games of the season. Also, before we hit the break, I have to give a shout out as well to friend of the show, Brandon Duhaime, for the sickest goal you will ever see in your life to make it 7-4 behind the back, like no look between the legs, just throws it on net and just gets through. It goes through a Toronto player's legs. It goes through Samsonov's 5-hole. Nobody knew it was coming. Brandon Duhaime, though, absolute A-plus level sauce on that goal. So Duhaime off to a great start here this year as well. And the Wild will need him and others to keep it rolling here as we go into what is going to be a very tricky week for the Minnesota Wild to navigate. We'll talk about what the Wild could potentially do with their lineup as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any of our in-game coverage, from pregame previews to intermission reports to our live postcasts. You don't want to miss out on any of it, so make sure that you stay up to date. Nobody does it better than Locked On Wild. Alex, let's talk about this week, although I do want to bring up a potential idea for the lineup, depending on how much time Matt Boldy is going to miss, if he indeed does miss any time, which I'm assuming based off the fact that we don't have any update yet that he's probably going to. On Twitter, Mike asks the following. What if on Tuesday, instead of the Wild going 11-7, they put Addison on the fourth line, bump Duhaime to the third line, and put Rossi on the second line to get Murmas into the lineup and to keep the 4-line continuity. The Wild did this last year with Addison, I believe, for one game. That is something that I think they're going to have to consider, because you're on the road. Unless you make an emergency call up later today, what you see is what you get. And so you figure that they're going to try to get everybody into the game. I'm guessing they'll likely go 11-7, but might not be a bad idea to just try a couple of different line combinations too.
Yeah, it's intriguing. If you were gonna do something like that, Montreal would definitely be the team to do it against, just because you just never know what you're gonna get with Montreal too. They're gonna give up a ton of goals this year. They, for some reason, are still going with Jake Allen as their starting goaltender. And now I know it's not their. I mean, they didn't expect Carey Price to just be done. That's killer. But to still be using Jake Allen as a goalie in 2023 is an outrageous move. But that's what they're doing, and so they definitely have some intriguing players like Cole Caulfield, obviously. But they're just a mess defensively, and so hopefully the Wild can take advantage of that, and experimenting with the lineup like Mike says, I think is a good idea, and gives a guy like Duhaime more ice time too, who probably deserves it, but he's just kind of stuck in the fourth line role just because of the Wild situation.
And that fourth line has played well
Yeah.
through the first two games. It's just, again, it really, the offense really hasn't been the problem with this team through 4 games. You've got 6 goals on the board. It's the 7 goals that they've allowed. And so I think getting Dakota Murmas into the game is important. Beyond that, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. It does sound like Marc-Andre Fleury will be in net against Montreal, and so you give Gustafsson an opportunity to just look at some of the stuff that happened against Toronto. And I think this is kind of how people had hoped that the goalie split would work out, with Fleury getting Montreal and then Gustafsson probably going up against the LA Kings. But you got the Canadiens, you got the Kings, and then you have a weird Columbus team to finish off the week. 2 games at home, and so an interesting stretch. These are winnable games, but if you play like you played against Toronto, you're not going to win any games the rest of the season.
Yeah, 100%. It doesn't matter. You cannot be giving up 7 goals. It sets you up for just disaster. And, I'm hoping on Thursday we get a Gus Talbot matchup, just for everything that is, that has happened, and the history linking those two forever. That would just be juicy. And, I can't believe LA, with how much talent they have offensively and on the back end, that they decided to just go with a Talbot, Copley tandem. I don't see that working out for them, and it stinks for their fans, because they added everything that they could possibly need except in goaltending, and they're kind of just trying to mask it. And that's a team that come trade deadline, I'm sure they'll try to get another goalie.
Well, and they've given up 11 goals through their first 2 games of the season.
It's a nightmare between those two. I just think Cam's run of being a good goaltender has come to a screeching halt in the NHL. He was on a good run, but I think this is where it ends.
As we are starting to see with Alex Goligoski, age catches up to everybody.
Yep.
It's just a matter of time. And it looks as though, like you said, because Talbot, I think, gave up 4 in his opening night start against the Colorado Avalanche. Phoenix Copley got the start against the Carolina Hurricanes, I think it was, and he gave up 6. And so, yeah, that's and actually, I think that was that an overtime winner? Or was that a shootout win?
Shootout, yeah.
So he gave up 5.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is one thing I don't like about ESPN, is because they factor in the shootout goals, and it's like,
right.
No, don't put those in there.
No.
It just led to a huge headache 2 years ago when the Wild were trying to break their franchise record for goals in a season. And it's like, hey, didn't we get there? It's like, no, because they counted all the shootout goals. It's like, just don't, Please,
Please.
don't do it.
Come on.
But we'll see. Obviously, if there's any breaking news on Matt Boldy's status, we'll give you an update. Have not heard anything definitive as of yet.
Makes everybody nervous when that happens.
Yeah. We kept an eye out while the Vikings were playing the Chicago Bears. The only thing I can say about that game was that it was a football game that consisted of two NFL teams. Like, the Vikings won, but it was one of those where it's like, I don't think either team deserves to win this game.
No.
If you want to hear more about that, make sure you give Luke Braun at Locked On Vikings a follow. I don't envy him having to try to break down a game like that. But anyway, we'll keep an eye out for Matt Boldy's status here as the week gets started. But we thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Wild. Make sure, as mentioned, you subscribe and follow on YouTube so you don't miss out on any content during games. Tuesday's game will have you fully covered with pregame, intermission reports, and a live postcast after the game as well. We've also got full episodes for you all throughout the week, every Monday through Friday, as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.